Well, slavery, another word that we use for modern slavery would be bondage or debt bondage. So what that means is that, just like you see in the movie, there'll be an agent or someone who works, on these types of fishing boats who'll go to vulnerable communities and they'll say to young boys and men who are struggling, I can find employment for you in big cities or, construction or working in a factory. If you work for, you give me your first month's wages or first 3 months' wages, then, I'll pay for you to go and to have that employment. So what happens is that they end up in that situation. Usually they don't end up working, they're tricked and lied to in terms of where they're going to end up working. And then once they start working, there's this big debt from having been moved from their original location to this new location that they then need to work off, so they never actually earn any money. And then their identity papers will be taken away from them. There'll be threats of violence. In this fishing industry, obviously they're trapped on a boat, so they don't have any freedom of movement. The boats can move out into the ocean, and then it can stay out there for really long periods of time, and that's made possible by the fact that other trawlers will come out to the boat and drop off food and collect the catch and then go back to port. So the boat can be, as part of this campaign, there was a survivor that was involved in helping to talk about this issue, and he was out at sea for 3 years and 7 months without touching land at all. Any age from sort of 10 or 11, as soon as child labour is, as soon as they can become useful, with being able to carry large items and, their limbs fully developed at any point that they can become useful. And quite often, it's a hard thing to say, but quite often parents will also sell their children into this type of labour, and, purely with the thought that it would be a better option for them, that they're struggling to provide for their children, and then, an agent comes to offer them a work opportunity in a bigger city, or it tricks the parents and gives them some money, then they take the child, and that's quite often how the children end up in this type of situation. In Australia, the biggest change has been that we've implemented the modern slavery legislation that was implemented here at the very end of last year. And as of this financial year, companies that are turnover over more than $100 million a year now has to make a public statement about the effort that they're putting into tracing their supply chain and making sure that there is no modern slavery within it, which is actually a really monumental shift in terms of how businesses think of their supply chains. They're very used to just sourcing from their direct supplier, but the actual legislation is now asking them to think about their supply chain as a network. So where their raw materials comes from through to their direct supplier that they're buying the product from, they're now responsible for making sure that there isn't any utilisation of slavery in that process. This isn't something that's going to happen overnight because, when Nestle mapped their supply chain just for Kit Kat, I think they found something like 17 layers within their supply chain. That's just for one product that they supply. So this is actually a huge effort to properly do it, to properly map who is within your supply chain and what risk there is. So businesses are just starting to grapple now with how do we tackle this? What kind of business systems and technology do we put in place to have that kind of transparency? And then the other thing is that the legislation actually requires that if you do find slavery, that you have a remediation process. And so, procurement organisations in multinationals don't know how to deal with remediating slavery when they find it. So this is a big learning curve for them as well. The best thing to do is to arm yourself with knowledge. We're still gathering a lot of awareness around this problem, but one of the things you can reliably do is to buy products that have been certified by an independent certifier. So fair trade is one that everybody really knows about. In this industry with seafood, the Marine Stewardship Council is actually the certifier, but even then that's quite environmentally focused and not so much on the social side and the human rights side. We're still evolving that within the seafood industry. But a good step is to be buying products that have an ethical certification, but not to boycott the products that that don't have that to write to the brands and to share information, because we're the consumer at the end of the day, and they have to respond to our demands. So to write to them and to send social media messages and those types of things to really start to drive that impetus and that change.